Of all Queen Victoria's children, Princess Helena Augusta Victoria remains the most unobtrusive in history. She was a very reserved and private person, and most of the information about her has come down to us only from the diaries of the monarch herself. It can be said that Princess Helena was overshadowed by her famous mother as if she were her forgotten daughter, and the relationship between them was far more complicated and tangled than it appears at first glance. Helena's fate began quite painfully. She was born on May 25th, 1846, and despite everything that had been done for her birth, she was not a healthy baby. Her father later recalled that at birth, the girl was quite bluish, indicating serious problems. However, thanks to experienced doctors from the close circle of the royal family, the girl eventually recovered and gained strength. Nevertheless, Helena's birth almost caused a real tragedy for the powerful woman, Queen Victoria herself, who at that moment nearly became hysterical. This difficult and heavy moment forced her, never showing weakness, to pause her royal duties to recover from such a severe delivery. Princess Helena grew up surrounded by 8 of her royal brothers and sisters, and the competition among them was incredibly fierce. The brothers did not hide their hereditary superiority, and their constant teasing and jokes could surpass any limits. But little Helena was by no means a quiet and shy girl. Rather, she lived by very different rules. If her brothers went too far with their games and taunts, she resolutely fought back, and this often manifested in her directly hitting them on the nose. Conflicts within the royal family were not limited to relationships with her brothers. The struggle with her sisters became increasingly evident, and here, the tension reached a particularly high level. In contrast to her older sisters, Princess Helena possessed many talents. She played the piano beautifully, had artistic abilities, loved horseback riding, and even learned cooking, cleaning, and farming, all at her father's insistence. Overall, she was considered one of the most capable and talented children of Queen Victoria. However, the situation changed with the arrival of her younger sister, Louise. The parents happily welcomed the newborn daughter, as her appearance was a long-awaited event in the royal family. For Helena, however, Louise became a real headache. The young girl, at just over a year old, quickly took the place of the youngest and became a somewhat inconvenient rival for Helena, sometimes even an irritating element. In the family, of course, everyone has their own black and white bright stripes and dark shadows. But gradually, it became clear that Louise's talents significantly surpassed her sister Helena's abilities, whose life was increasingly overshadowed by her more prominent siblings. Part 2 of 11. A particularly devastating blow for Helena was the tragic news that forever changed her destiny. On December 24th, 1861, she learned of the death of her beloved father, Prince Albert, who died of typhoid fever. Grief enveloped the entire family, and Helena experienced it especially acutely. She later wrote to her friend that she adored her father and loved him more than anything in the world. He was her hope, her advisor, and her pillar of support. During those days, they shared the happiest moments of their lives, but now everything was over, and a sense of despair took hold of the girl's heart. Her mother's actions during this difficult time only compounded her suffering. In her state of mourning, her mother made a decision. She ordered Helena and her sisters to leave Windsor. The entire royal family moved to Osborne House, where a continuous period of mourning and seclusion from the public began. The time of grief was supposed to be a time of restraint and inner reflection, but it was precisely during such moments that one could typically count on the support of loved ones. However, complicated and often disorganized family relationships made this nearly impossible. Moreover, her mother's actions only intensified Helena's feelings of loneliness. In the absence of her father, whom she could trust, the queen relied almost entirely on her eldest daughter, Princess Alice, who acted as a sort of unofficial secretary. Alice, like Helena, the noble heir, also had her own problems and difficulties. At the very moment when help was needed for their mother, Helena seemed the most obvious and natural choice. As the eldest daughter, she could fulfill this role. But her mother ultimately disagreed, believing Helena was too unprepared and emotionally unstable, as she sometimes started to cry without reason. Wounding her heart anew, her mother decided to entrust this task to her youngest sister, Louise. As a result, Helena was left without support within her family, and it is no surprise that during such times she began seeking comfort and love elsewhere. It was through this that her fate led her into a relationship with Karl Ruland, a romance doomed from the start. Ruland was the former personal secretary of her father and roughly 13 years older than Helena. Soon after her mother learned of the relationship in 1863, she could no longer contain her anger and shock. Her mother immediately dismissed Ruland, sending him back to Germany to end this unwanted and strange attachment. Likely, Helena's own heart was broken upon hearing the sad news, but her suffering did not end there. Her mother decisively took steps to organize her daughter's future, believing that the best way to keep the young heiress out of trouble was to marry her off as soon as possible. Of course, Helena's mother intended to be the sole decision-maker in choosing her future husband. However, Helena herself faced certain difficulties that prevented her from finding the perfect candidate who would meet her ideas of a prince or princess. According to Helena's personal biographer, she was plump, with a double chin and quite a flattened face. In other words, not exactly resembling the fairy tale princess usually depicted in imagination. Being the middle child in the family, Helena encountered additional challenges when trying to secure a favorable marriage. Moreover, her mother added a crucial condition that seriously complicated the young princess's fate. Earlier, in 1662, Helena's mother had married off her eldest sister, which resulted in Helena herself taking on the role of an unofficial secretary to the queen. In this unusual but quite responsible position, the girl proved herself very well. She became a reliable assistant and an excellent companion to the queen. Seeing that her daughter was handling her role so effectively, Helena's mother imposed a strict requirement. Any man wishing to marry Helena had to not only pass a check, but also move to live with her. Imagine how few suitors could meet such strict conditions. Among all potential candidates, the choice fell on Prince Christian of Schleswig-Holstein. However, this union faced several serious obstacles. Firstly, the prince was quite poor, and secondly, he was significantly older than Helena. Additionally, his ancestral duchies were located in an area of conflict between Prussia and Denmark, making any relationship more vulnerable. Helena's older sister, Crown Princess, supported the idea of the marriage, while another sister, Alice, was categorically opposed. It was not only the sisters who held differing opinions. Disagreements also arose among other family members regarding the future union. Particularly vehemently opposed was Alexandra, another of Helena's sisters, the wife of the Danish king, who believed that most of the lands involved in the dispute should belong to her father. For a noble lady like Alexandra, her mother's decision to marry Helena to Christian was perceived as an absolutely unjustified and shameful step. Overall, choosing a prince for Helena proved to be very difficult and painful for the entire family, and its consequences undoubtedly turned out to be quite profound and complex. Although this political scandal attracted public attention, we heard almost nothing about Helena's own views and feelings regarding the unfolding events. Amid all this fuss and family drama caused by the proposed marriage, Helena and her chosen one, Christian, remained happy, genuinely pleased to be together. Upon meeting, Helena instantly felt that he was a worthy person, polite, calm, and with a kind, old-fashioned manner. Her mother and Helena herself concurred that this marriage seemed to be an ideal match. In the end, the wedding took place, and although it was supposed to be the beginning of their life together, it did not significantly improve Helene's position within the royal court. The marriage ceremony, which was held on July 5, 1866, turned out to be far from perfect. The day before the celebration, the situation was already tense. Helene's elder brother Edward, husband of Alexandra, almost refused to participate, protesting against the circumstances. The entire day was clouded by misadventures. One of the guests suddenly suffered a gout attack, and amid the festive hustle and bustle, one of the royal guests openly remarked that Helene looked as if she was about to marry her elderly uncle. Such a start certainly did not bode well for a smooth and happy life together, and family relations only worsened as events unfolded. Yet, despite all the hardships, Helene and her husband impressed everyone with their resilience, choosing a path of quiet and harmonious union. They devoted themselves completely to each other, and in spite of all family upheavals, their marriage remained relatively peaceful. Helene, who had recently been considered one of the least suitable candidates for a wife among the queen's daughters, found true happiness precisely in this union. At the same time, she yearned for her mother to leave behind all these burdens and avoid making new mistakes. Promising to maintain closeness with the queen after marriage, Helene quickly faced enormous difficulties. Keeping that promise proved almost impossible. A year after the wedding, when Helene became pregnant again, her responsibilities grew to include roles such as her best friend, personal secretary to her mother, and caretaker of her husband. The physical and emotional stress became unbearable for her, and her health began to deteriorate more and more. Like her mother, Helene had many children in succession, which resulted in the birth of several offspring. Christian Victor in 1867, Albert in 1869, Princess Helene Victoria in 1870, and finally, Mary Louisa in 1872. Constant pregnancies and the strain on her health took a heavy toll, and it was obvious that Helene's health was starting to fail. Deeply troubled by her illness, she struggled to find sympathy from her mother, who in this situation showed no compassion. On the contrary, she accused Helene of hypochondria, claiming that her health was merely a whim or a fabrication, and that, in her opinion, Christ was supporting such delusions of her daughter. For Helene, however, her constant health anxieties were well justified. Over a 2-year period from 1816 to 1871, she suffered from painful attacks that included rheumatism, joint pain, and severe breathing difficulties that affected her lungs. But besides these quite serious illnesses, there was another, much more troubling and sinister health condition that she could neither explain nor treat, and which soon became one of her main worries. In addition to numerous physical ailments, Helena had one more major problem: dependency on substances. For her fuel, she often used opium and laudanum, the latter prescribed by her doctor, despite her already suffering from an addiction. Despite this, striving to have her own life, she did everything possible to find a balance outside the royal court salon and from her mother, who suppressed her with her overprotectiveness and control. For Helena, separation from her mother became a small respite, a breath of fresh air, giving her the chance to breathe more freely. However, even in these moments of independence, she understood that her fate was not always favorable, and that a string of misfortunes might strike her again. A small light appeared in her life on May 12, 1876. On that day, she and her husband held their newborn, their fifth child, a boy named Harold, for the first time. At that moment, it seemed that happiness had smiled upon her once more. However, the joy was short-lived. Just 8 days later, when the baby was only 8 days old, his life was suddenly cut short. A year later, on May 7, 1877, no less devastating news came: the loss of another unborn child. She had given birth to a stillborn. This was a shock for Helena. The situation, when 2 of her children vanished in such a short period of time within one family tragedy, stunned and devastated her to her very core. Perhaps unsurprisingly, at such a moment, exhausted by grief and loss, Helena began to show signs of irritability and moodiness, which was a natural reaction to profound sorrow and physical weakness. Her health was undoubtedly compromised. She had just endured 2 terrible losses, and her suffering affected her behavior. Her reaction to illness and loss, complete indifference to her condition, refusal to attempt to improve her health, became obvious to everyone, and for Helena herself, an almost hopeless fate. Over time, it seemed that destiny decided to test her again. On December 14, 1877, her family faced tragedy once more. Her sister Alice died of diphtheria. This death was a blow to the entire family, especially Helena, who had always been close to her sister. In the early stages after her wedding to Christ, it was Alice, despite disagreements and disputes, who persuaded her brother, Prince Edward, to attend Helena's wedding. Their relationship was fraught with disagreements, yet despite everything, they supported each other and stayed close in difficult times. Their life story is one of a difficult but unwavering journey through the tests of fate, full of trials of human emotions and tragedies of loss. At the most critical moment, when the situation demanded special attention, Alice experienced strong anxiety regarding their mother's influence on Helena. As it turned out, her fears were fully justified. After Helena endured terrible losses, her attention gradually shifted toward her husband and children, naturally distracting her from her mother. As a result, she spent less and less time in the company of her mother, the Queen, who had arranged the marriage so that Helena could communicate more with her. This queen was genuinely irritated by such a turn of events, as she hoped her daughter would find warmth and support within the parental circle. A cruel twist of fate was that Helena began to show interest in subjects that were categorically incompatible with her mother's understanding. She was particularly captivated by the idea of women's rights, a topic that her mother, ironically, considered completely wrong and dangerous. Unlike her mother, who looked down on the women's rights movement, Helena actively supported it. She used her royal position to promote numerous initiatives, which she believed helped women. She especially liked ideas related to sisterhood and crafts, areas where she saw opportunities to help women gain independence and self-realization. In 1887, Helena became the president of the British Nurses Association, marking an important milestone in her life. In this role, she supported a revolutionary proposal to create a registry of nurses aimed at improving education and the social status of women who chose caregiving and service professions. Helena did not limit herself to formal presidencies. She demonstrated true determination and activity. When her ideas faced resistance from some members of the organization, she unhesitatingly rejected it, showing that for her, leadership meant being strong and unwavering. In her management style, she modeled herself on her mother, leading the association with strict efficiency. Whenever someone questioned her orders, she responded without hesitation, "It is my wish, and that is enough." In public speeches, Helena spoke with full confidence and strength. Those around her felt in her a leader capable of inspiring. But behind her outward confidence hid a personal struggle that many did not suspect. Deep down, she suffered from unbearable pain and a passionate internal conflict. By 1894, Helena's dependence on opium had gotten out of control, and the situation became so critical that even her mother took notice and was deeply concerned. Her husband, seeking to help, personally requested a doctor to do everything possible to free Helena from this destructive habit. When Helena found out about it, she was seized with furious rage. She was absolutely unable to cope without her medication. She demanded that the doctor. Unlike this, when a woman was forced to give up drugs, she was subjected to harsh fasting, a complete denial of all doses without mercy. Naturally, this caused her intense physical and emotional suffering. Her body began to react very badly to the abrupt cessation, and she experienced severe withdrawal symptoms. At first, there were even complaints of vision loss, and her condition grew increasingly critical. Eventually, with the support of her elder sister, who proved to be her closest and most reliable anchor, this woman was able to overcome her addiction and rid herself of opiates. This achievement became truly significant and meaningful for her, as she had conquered a terrible disease and was able to break free from a destructive habit. However, joyful events could not last long, for there was another, tragic aspect in this person's life related to a complicated family history and losses. In the 20th century, in 1909, fate arranged that moments of celebration and personal triumph were interrupted by bitter events. Helena's eldest son, a young man very ambitious and determined, dedicated his life to military service by joining the British Army. He participated multiple times in battles abroad and eventually attained the rank of major. Helena was immensely proud of him because her son displayed courage and virtues she could only dream of. Considering him a vital part of her life, she calmly accepted his latest expedition to South Africa, a highly risky enterprise about which she harbored no doubts. But just at the moment when she thought her heir was in safety, tragedy struck. Helena could not have known that this would be her last farewell. On October 25, 1909, an anxious message arrived at her parents' doorstep, informing her that her elder son had fallen ill with malaria in South Africa and was in a critical condition. 5 days later, more news came, and it was far more tragic. Her son had died from the disease, unable to withstand the illness. Helena coped with this terrible grief with considerable dignity, trying to maintain her inner composure, but it was very difficult for her. Her mother, then already quite elderly, reacted to the news of her grandson's death with extreme distress. Her health quickly deteriorated, and grief completely overwhelmed her, causing further complications. For a long time, Helena, along with her younger sister Beatrice, who was also very close to her emotionally, did not leave their mother's bedside. They carefully watched every movement, every breath to support her during this difficult time. On the eve of January 22, 1919, Helena's mother passed away, holding back tears and understanding that she had lost her most close and dear soul. This period marked the beginning of a new era and changes in the lives of the entire family. However, for Helena, her mother's death meant not only the loss of a beloved person, but also the emergence of new family dramas and personal tragedies. The year 12,001 became particularly difficult. Her older sister, the heiress, who was already 60 years old at the time, was gravely ill, a serious illness taking a toll on her health, and she could not hold on much longer. Helena received numerous letters from her sister, filled with pictures and descriptions of the intense pain she constantly endured. In her own words, her sister conveyed how agonizing her suffering was, and despite all efforts, helping her was almost impossible. By August of that year, this terrible disease, probably cancer, ultimately claimed the life of her older sister. Gradually, as if evaporating, Helena's relatives and close brothers and sisters disappeared from her life. Each of them passed away one after another, leaving behind a bitter sense of loss and emptiness. However, the most painful of all for Helena was saying goodbye to her elder brother Edward, a loss that shook her to her core and forever changed her destiny. By the time Helena's grief over her mother's passing overwhelmed her, a new monarch had ascended the throne, young King Edward I, accompanied by his wife, Alexandra of Denmark. Tensions arose within the royal family. Helena's brother did not maintain close ties with her, and his extreme jealousy of the royal family hindered genuine friendship and understanding between him and his sister. Meanwhile, Alexandra, a person with strong ambitions, remained dissatisfied and even took pleasure in making snide remarks about Helena's marriage to Christian, doing everything possible to wound her. During these difficult years, filled with grief and trials, Helena displayed remarkable resilience and diligently carried out her duties, remaining the chairperson of the Army Nursing Service. When Alexandra became queen, she suddenly showed an astonishing interest in nursing work and insisted on her candidacy for the chairmanship position, aiming to change the order of things and cast Helena into the shadows. These changes immediately caused tension and sharp confrontation, turning the relationship between sister and new queen into a real conflict. The decision to propose marriage, which ultimately divided them even more, led to a deep rift between Helena and Alexandra, negatively affecting her relationship with her older brother as well. Unfortunately, Helena could not influence these changes. Due to her high rank, she was forced to relinquish her position, handing over management to Alexandra, and continued to support the monarchy, although she did not need to serve the new king for a long time. Helena was not the only family member suffering from addictions. Her elder brother, crowned as Edward VII, smoked excessively, and this harmful habit ultimately led to his premature death. On May 6, 1910, after only 9 years of reign, he died after suffering a series of severe heart attacks. Preoccupied with worries and hardships caused by war and internal upheavals, Edward had suffered from numerous heart ailments in his later years, which ultimately brought about his demise. And 4 years later, when the First World War broke out across Europe, Helena's family was once again drawn into personal tragedies. Her eldest son, Albert, went to serve in the army, but not the British one. He ended up in the Prussian army and fought on Germany's side. During that fateful time, Helena could do little but wait for the war to end, which brought her yet another shock. She received alarming news concerning her loved ones and the fate of her country. However, the details of these events remained unknown to her. Helena's children were already raising their own children, and by 1941, her family had reached what seemed impossible. She had come to terms with the thought that she would never become a great-grandmother. But fate took an unexpected turn. Everything changed on one of those days when Albert confided in her, revealing a secret connection that led to the birth of a daughter named Valeria Maria. He never disclosed who was the mother of this girl, and that was a real blow to Helena's heart. Now she had a granddaughter who filled the emptiness in her soul and gave her a new reason to live. In this difficult moment, she needed to distract herself from Albert and his scandalous story. Despite her advanced age, Helena did not succumb to despair. Instead, during the years of the First World War, she engaged in active efforts. Her passion for medicine and helping those in need did not fade. It became even more relevant. Most of the war she dedicated to visiting as many hospitals as possible. There, she not only lifted the spirits of the wounded, but also proved with her lively energy that charitable work brings true joy and purpose. Such a heart made her very popular among ordinary people, who respected her for her genuine care and selflessness. Moreover, it was during the war years that Helena celebrated her 50th wedding anniversary with her husband. Interestingly, this marriage was the longest of all her unions with siblings. However, it would be wrong to hope that her spouse was an ideal man. Within the family, he did not show much involvement in the affairs of the British royal family or their public duties. He was a good father, an excellent husband, and a useful member of the monarchical structure, but he was unlikely to be considered an active participant in royal matters or in supporting his loved ones. Even after many years of living with Helena, her husband rarely participated in the preparation and execution of her sister's and brother's royal duties. Yet, the most difficult part was not this. In 1917, after a long and eventful life, his life was cut short. He passed away at the age of 86. This loss was a tragedy in itself, but for Helena, it marked the beginning of a true nightmare. After her husband's death, a series of prolonged hardships began. Officials and managers attempted to evict her from her two residences, Chamberburg House and Cumberland Lodge, under the pretext of the high maintenance costs of these estates. As a result, the final years of her life were filled with worries and adversities, which, to put it mildly, was a heavy test for a woman with a rich life story and many accomplishments. In the spring of 1923, Helena contracted a dangerous illness that ended her life. It was the flu, a treacherous and dark disease capable of claiming many lives at that time. At the end of May, after enduring several difficult days, the elderly princess had a heart attack and died, leaving a long-lasting mark on the history of her family and country. On June 9, 1923, the morning after her death, biographers paid little attention to the very private and mysterious princess, about whom very little is known. Most of the information about her has come down to us through stories told by her mother and her own opinions about her daughter. However, the mother's views were sometimes unfairly harsh and even cruel. When biographies mention Helena, they most often criticize her appearance and personal traits. Nevertheless, it is worth noting that some of these remarks were deserved, since, as is known, Helena and some of her other royal siblings suffered from excess weight. However, perhaps these critics were not entirely objective, as many of the sharp comments about Helena came from her mother's letters and diaries, and future biographers often perceived her mother's words as the truth. Still, Helena was certainly not the quiet, shy, and obedient person that her biographers sometimes portray her to be. Despite the varying opinions of those around her, her status as a princess made her very attractive to others, and she did not miss the opportunity to take advantage of this. In particular, when there was a need to promote her recently founded Royal Embroidery School, Helena used her royal status to her advantage to attract attention and increase interest in the school. She organized tea parties for noble ladies of society who wished to be in her royal presence. The presence of famous and respected ladies at such events significantly enhanced the prestige of the school and created a special reputation around it. This interest and excitement continued to grow, and even today the school remains active and popular. Thus, thanks to her skillful strategy of leveraging her royal status, Elena was able not only to attract attention to her educational project, but also to establish lasting traditions that continue to exist to this day, despite the passing years. We thank you for your interest in the history and facts of the past. If you're eager to learn more about exciting historical events, keep an eye on our content. Don't forget to delve into the stories of great personalities and events, and continue our fascinating journey into the past.